Welcome, Magnus here. If you're the type of person that likes to learn how to use your camera a bit better, specifically for video, or you like to hear about the latest and greatest about upcoming cameras that are exciting, definitely consider subscribing to my channel. That would be cool. So let's get on with the topic for today. How to and how not to use IBIS when recording video, and how this can apply to pretty much any camera that has IBIS or even digital IBIS. I'm going to use the Canon R5 in today's example, but I'm going to pretty much talk you through how to use IBIS, because IBIS is something that a lot of vloggers get excited about, specifically when they're going to hold their camera up in front of them and just vlog, and walk and talk at the same time. And I'm going to let you know why. In some cases, vlogging with IBIS is a good idea, and in other cases, it's not so much. Especially when you get sort of like an unnatural wobble or effect that you normally would see with IBIS. So speaking of IBIS wobble, let's talk about that first. What is IBIS wobble? Now, IBIS wobble is predominantly seen when you have a wide angle lens, such as the type of lens that you'd use to like film yourself and vlog with yourself, because you'd have to use a wider lens in order to be able to hold the camera in front of you and talk to it and talk to your audience and let them share in your experiences with you. However, when it comes to sharing that experience, what you don't want is to get your audience distracted or sick by how you're filming, specifically when you're filming with IBIS. Now, if you don't have IBIS, what tends to happen, especially if you're walking and talking, is you have a lot of like shaky camera action that looks pretty much sickening and unnatural. So IBIS would help correct that so that you can actually be in your vlog and not shake the camera so much. However, the side effect to that, especially with cameras that have a good amount of IBIS built in and you're using a wide angle lens, is that the sides and the corners and specifically anything in your background will tend to look like jello and produce a jello-y effect, which is not good. And that's why one of the first tips that I want to tell you is when you're vlogging, walking and talking with IBIS, do not use it. It looks horrible. Turn your IBIS off. Figure out a way differently to vlog. For example, setting your camera down and then approaching it, speaking to it, putting it on a tripod, something where you can hold it and let people feel like they're not moving, and then you just kind of show them what you're looking at or talk to them directly, but keeping the camera absolutely still. My opinion is that's the best way to vlog, and if you're going to vlog and you want to show them things or the area that you're around, rather than pointing the camera at yourself, cut and point the camera at something that you're looking at. And for those particular scenarios, whether you have IBIS or not is not particularly important, because you're just showing them specific things, which gives you better control of the camera since you're holding it potentially with more than one hand. So that's why, at least from a vlogging perspective, IBIS isn't really something that's totally crucial. And if you can't help it and you insist on having footage walking and talking and stabilized, I've done it before too, but I would actually use a gimbal. When using a gimbal, you will not experience that same jello effect that you would get when you're actually using IBIS, because it's the whole camera that's steady and not just the sensor and everything trying to work against your movements. So if you insist on vlogging like that, as I have before in the past, I would recommend getting a gimbal, and that could be a pretty heavy setup. So I suggest if you're going to do that, keep it sparingly. Don't do it all the time unless you're like super jacked up and you can hold it for a long amount of time. So those are the negatives about using IBIS on your camera when filming. However, one of the upsides and one of the best things that you can actually use, turn that IBIS on, is definitely when you're recording some speech or some live performance and you happen to not have a tripod. And this happens sometimes. Sometimes we're like running and gunning and we want to record someone speaking. For example, you're following a documentary, or you find some interesting people that you just want to kind of record and get some attention to that person. By turning IBIS on, you can actually act as a tripod, and because you're facing that person, I would suspect that you're probably not using a wider lens because you want to get a closer shot. But regardless if you're using a wider lens or not, because you're actually trying to hold the camera steady, what you'll notice, and this applies to digital stabilization as well as IBIS, you can basically just act like a tripod and your movements will be so subtle it'll hardly be picked up. The wobble won't be as noticeable either, and you'll actually get great shots that actually look like you're using a gimbal or even a tripod, which is even better. Another great way to use IBIS is when you're actually filming B-roll. Not just live performances, but anytime you're shooting any type of B-roll, you could just point the camera at whatever you want to show people. And especially if you want like slow motion, or if you want just specific shots that show movement and you moving the camera, because of that IBIS, you'll be able to actually demonstrate a steady hand and actually have good looking footage without exactly having a gimbal. And they work for vlogs if you're shooting B-roll, and they work for any type of film that you're recording for, because it actually looks like a professionally shot setup. And that's what's great. And I would totally recommend using IBIS for those particular scenarios. Now, another kind of downside when using IBIS is when you're actually following people up close and using IBIS. For example, if they're only a couple of feet away from you and you're shooting their movements and where they're going, sometimes that type of action could also lead to IBIS wobble, because you're moving the camera quickly and just focusing on their faces or what they're doing that's actually close to you, which kind of simulates the same effect as when you're vlogging yourself. And those quick movements, you might have a little bit more camera shake with your hands, which would only exacerbate the problems that you get with IBIS. Digital or in-body image stabilization would have similar effects where you have somewhat of a wobble. So I would be careful when filming other people that are close to you that are moving around a lot. That could be a bad combination with IBIS. Now, I gave you a lot of tips, but there are some cameras that have the ability to turn on not only in-body image stabilization with the sensor, but add digital stabilization on top of that. Should you use both? Is one better than the other? What happens if you turn on the super enhanced digital stabilization along with your IBIS? Is that a good idea? Based off my personal experience, nothing's going to save vlogging. Even if you turn on enhanced digital stabilization with sensor IBIS, you're still going to have some shakes. It's still going to be unnatural and you're still going to get that wobble. So even enhanced digital is not going to save you from unfortunate wobble on your Canon R5, for example, but for any camera that uses IBIS. But when it comes to, for example, live performances or filming people who are somewhat distant, the more stabilization that you turned on, especially if you're not doing any sudden jerky moves, the better, because you're going to be that much steadier. And if you're using, for example, a 4K mode on my R5, I would turn on enhanced stabilization in combination with the in-body image stabilization, and it crops in a bit, but because the people were distant from me, I was able to get a really smooth shot, and recording at 4K HQ, I was still getting to get really sharp images with minimal crop compared to something like not having it and having to crop in post. I can see what my composition is, and I can see it and record it right there already stabilized, rather than having to use Adobe Premiere or any other editing software to digitally stabilize the footage. It's all done in camera and makes life a ton easier. So yes, I do recommend turning on as much stabilization as you possibly can if you're not doing jerky movements. If you will be moving the camera a little bit faster than expected because you don't know where your performer or where your subject is moving and how fast it's moving, then I would suggest maybe turning down the stabilization, or maybe just having the in-body image stabilization on without the digital stabilization to help that out, because what happens is that the camera shot will not move as fast as you do. There'll be somewhat of a lag, which might ruin the shot that you're trying to get in the first place. So there is a time and a place to turn that digital on, especially if you're more in control and you're working with slow movements. But anything faster than normal, and you're doing handheld, just turn on IBIS and just leave it at that. And hopefully you'll be able to get the shots that you need. But that's my tips and advice when it comes to IBIS on any camera really, but these in particular I tested with the Canon R5. I do also believe that if your camera does not have in-body image stabilization at all, but you do have optical image stabilization works great. But these rules would somewhat apply to that as well. Although the wobble isn't as bad when you have optical image stabilization, it's still possible that you might get it. So yes, it would even apply to cameras that don't have image stabilization, but sell lenses that actually do. So, or even cameras that only have digital, keep that in mind as well. So it kind of applies to all. But the examples that I showed you are with the R5. Anyway, that's all I got to say for today. Got a couple of more videos, hopefully that I can get out this week. But if not, this is what you get. And thank you so much for subscribing. Leave me comments down below to whether you vlog or use anything with image stabilization built into your camera or not. And if it's helpful, let me know in the comments down below. Now, the one thing that I actually learned when it came to doing these tests for this video is that I thought I can probably cure the IBIS wobble if I actually turned on enhanced image stabilization, had a super wide lens. I had 11 to 20 millimeter Tokina, which I put at 11 millimeters, put on enhanced IS, and basically didn't think I would have to worry, because if I'm just using digital image stabilization, I wouldn't have that wobble, and I still got it. So unfortunately, I learned a lesson. Don't think you can walk and talk and actually look semi-presentable. Find your own way to vlog, of course, but those are just the side effects I experienced. But as always, thank you guys. You make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. See you next time.